And I think in general, when you're just around people who are incredibly smart, incredibly talented, you just grow as a person as well.
But it's about your experience. No one can invalidate that. So
कि भैया क्या कर रहे हो आप कितने सालों से हो You got this part.
that I'll cut. Don't worry. Let's talk about money.
Yeah, I don't need guidance to what to say. Okay, put this reaction.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Beyond Small Talk. So today with us we have a very special guest, someone who left a good paying corporate job to start their own food truck venture, a passion project. So let's talk to her and find out what it truly takes to build a food truck. All of the behind the scenes that we probably don't have access to. So let's welcome Mehak Jain on the podcast.
Hello, hi Mehak.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. So let's just get straight into it.
Let's go.
I've actually given a small intro about you, so people kind of know who you are at this point, but they still don't really know the Mehak that probably your close one have seen. So let's dive a little deeper into it, both your professional and personal life. So tell us a little about your journey from Goldman Sachs, a big corporation like that, to running a food truck catering business. How did that happen?
Okay, so I basically did my graduation from a college called Christon. I majored in finance, and after that, I got placed into Goldman Sachs through placements, of course. So I worked there for around 2.5 years, and I had an absolutely stellar experience working there. Had the best team, really loved the work that I was doing, and all of that was going quite well. But then, what I realized, no matter how much I liked what I was doing, I realized part of me that wanted to start something of my own. How every second person wants to start, right? And I think what also played a big role in it was the fact that my family was from a business background. Everybody in my family, my mom, my dad, my brother, sister-in-law, even all of them have their own independent businesses. So I think it just was a matter of time before I quit the corporate hustle to actually start something of my own. And things also weren't as scary, mostly because I'd already been working for 2.5 years. I was like, I'll take a gap for 1 year, 2 years. I'll see how it goes. Let's say it doesn't pan out in my favor. Then there's always MBA that I can do to, sort of get back into the industry, or the network that I've already created. I can just tap into it to get another job. So I feel like that wasn't the part where I sort of needed courage. It was required much later, which I'll tell you later in the. But then yes, quit my job, called you, and said that I wanted to do something. Fully manipulated you into leaving your plans of getting a job, and we basically started it together. I realized it's been quite a ride, but if I feel like I'll keep going, then it'll be a long monologue from my side. So I'll let you ask me specific questions.
I love how I got you as a guest here because if you can just keep going, that's the best guest a person can have in their podcast. So I don't think a lot of people know that we co-founded a food truck venture together a year ago from now. I remember.
And then she left.
Yeah, we will come to that. We will see why I left eventually. Just so another question I wanted to ask you was, do you think your experience in the corporate has somehow helped you building this venture up, or if it hasn't helped you, either or?
I think it certainly has. I think more so because the person that I was in college, I was fairly confident even back in college, but I didn't know how to go about things, formally or officially. What would be the most obvious way to get a task done? My perception in college versus my perception in corporate was very different. And another thing was that I feel like Goldman Sachs really helped me sort of open up to people. So there's this concept in Goldman, it's called catch up. So you keep meeting people, you keep having conversations with them, and it's just called the catch up. You can catch up with anyone and everyone. Anybody who's as juniors, they can get to, let's say, even the MD of your team. And I feel like I remember when I was having my first couple of catch ups, I just didn't know what to say after like the first 5 minutes of the conversation. It used to get so awkward. And I feel like after a zillion catch ups in my 3 years at Goldman, it really opened me up to having conversations with people. And when you're very comfortable in speaking to people, that is when you can truly negotiate with them, haggle with them, deal with them, which was all things that I had to do when I opened my own business. I feel like if I would have been hesitant to just get to that part of talking to people, much advanced stuff, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So I feel like that is certainly something that Goldman helped me do. And I was in a compliance role, which meant full day I had to sit and negotiate with people. No, this is not right. No, that is not right. You have to cooperate with me. So I think that is like one big thing that helped me. And I think in general, when you're just around people who are incredibly smart, incredibly talented, you just grow as a person as well. Like there are so many minute things that I don't even know that I might have picked up that has sort of shaped me into the person that I am today. And I'm glad that I got that experience, those 3 years of Goldman.
Lovely. Out of the things you were mentioning, one thing that piqued my interest was the fact that you've had to refine your negotiation skills, right? That is not easy for everyone to do. It is a art that you need in this current world we live in to be able to pursue someone to give you what you want out of them without making them feel like they're giving up or losing something, right? Can you think of a few instances where you've had to do it while setting up your food truck?
I think the one that comes to my mind the most would be, I remember before our truck came, we basically put up a stall in Church Street because we were waiting for the truck. We didn't want to waste time. We sort of wanted to try a couple of our menu items with people, sort of get feedback and also spread the word around about the food truck. So I remember we put this up in Church Street. The thing in Church Street is that Monday to Friday, you have all the space to put up the stall and nobody's going to say anything to you.
I remember this one.
Yeah. But then Saturday and Sunday, you need to be in luck and you really have to just fight your way through everything to get a spot. It's so crammed up.
Yeah.
And I remember that the way we got a spot on Saturday and Sundays, that I remember the first couple of days when we started putting up the stall. On the weekdays, there used to be a lot of street vendors around us who used to be very curious. That why are these two girls here on a weekday putting up a stall? Like, don't they have full-time jobs? And I remember that we used to just walk up to them, start a little conversation with them that, hey, bhaiya, kya kar rahe ho? Kitne saalon se ho? And then just give them a couple of free drinks every now and then. And I remember that they then connected us to another person who helped us get the spot. And then even with them, we used to like butter him up every couple of hours. And then a lot of people used to come and fight with us about that spot that, hey, you can't park here because either this is right in front of our shop, you're disturbing our business, or other vendors used to fight that, hey, we've been, putting up our stall for ages now here. How can you put it up? And I feel like that is when we needed negotiation the most. But somehow calm them down, somehow tell them or let them actually let us park the table there. I think that was where we needed the negotiation the most. And it's nothing like you learn in business schools. Like I got to know that this person is about to get married, and for another 30 minutes I had to talk to him about his wife and where they're going on the honeymoon and what are his plans, is his wife gonna stay with him, not gonna stay with him, and I figured out that's a sweet spot. And then I went on and on and on, and that was what finally made him melt towards us. He was like a bar owner somewhere.
Fact that you made the conversation so personalized, which means he almost feels like, oh, he can trust you now. He can tell his personal things, which also means he can probably give you some professional advices as well, which definitely did work out in our favor, I remember. But that instance also reminds me of a very interesting, in fact, one of the first time ever that I think we probably have blatantly faced a gender discrimination, I would say. And I remember the perfume person who was taking a spot next to us refused to address us directly, despite multiple people telling him that we are the owners of the spot, the food truck who have occupied the spot. He refused to address us and he only was willing to talk to us through a middle man. So that I think was definitely eye-opening for a second, although I think we have been privileged enough in our upbringing to probably not have experienced it firsthand, but that definitely showed the ground reality is not how it is.
I think that is very true, and not only in terms of gender discrimination. Like, what I would like to believe is that I think all of our lives we've been around a certain class of people, all through school, all through college, even in our corporate careers, or wherever we've been. We've only worked around people who are at least aware of the social, I don't know what the right word is, but social etiquette, so they just know what is right, what is not. They might not follow it, but they're at least aware of it in a way that they won't do it blatantly or straight away. I think we were very protected, and I feel like when we sort of started with the food truck, most of the people that we had to deal with were people who were from the grassroots, right? I'm struggling to find the right words. I do not want to get cancelled. So yeah, who were from the Grassroots.
We try and be politically correct as possible, but it's about your experience. No one can invalidate
Correct,
that. So.
exactly. You were from the grassroots, and it's about gender discrimination. It was about age discrimination. Like, especially when I moved to Chandigarh, I realized that people weren't taking me as seriously because I was, let's say, only 24, 25. What I had to do was I had to like delegate a lot of the conversations that I was having with people to my mom so that they think that, somebody who's an authority figure is speaking to them because they didn't want to listen to me. Or things like that, when we talk to people, we just expect that they'll be polite, they'll be softer, they'll be kinder, which is not how it truly works with the people at grassroots. They're so, used to the fact that the market is so cutthroat that they don't have time to be kind and soft and polite and they'll give it to you as it is. At that point in time, I think you have to be solid enough yourself to give it back. And you have to constantly draw boundaries with them that, hey, this is okay and hey, that is not okay. I think my friends keep joking with me that I've gotten a little rude or straightforward, but that is true. That is how you have to become when you're dealing with people. You just have to give it to them as it is. And I feel like if it wasn't for that, people would have just taken undue advantage of the situation or just not taken me seriously if I hadn't done that. So yeah.
I think apart from the gender, the age is also definitely a factor. I think when you are working with blue collar, grassroots level vendors, and that's the kind of day-to-day activities that you have to indulge in, that is definitely a very valid point. I think a lot of people out there, youngsters who are looking into doing a business, might not realize this aspect that how the lack of idea is not the problem. The fact that they won't be able to execute it because the team probably going to listen to them or pay attention to them is definitely going to be a problem. But anyways, moving on from that, let's actually talk about setting up a food truck, right? The logistics of it. What are the first few steps that someone need to do to get a food truck up and running?
I think the first thing that you should definitely do is go scout for a place where you'll park it. And this should come before you even ideate how you want the truck to be, what you want, what should be the vibe of it, or what's the entire concept of your food truck. That's all secondary. That's just something that you can come up with. Most important thing should be where will you park it, right? And you should actually go to that place, see if you can legally park it there. If it is, let's say, a public space, working the legalities out with the authorities is going to be a whole challenge in itself because there isn't a very clear legal framework around getting food trucks parked in public spaces. So one is that.
Yeah.
Second would be that even if, let's say, your MC allows it, the vendors around you will create a huge problem for you. And if you're not a local, it could be something that is hard to deal with. Third, if you take a rented space, beautiful.
Yeah.
But see what the rent is, see what kind of crowd comes there. Is there enough crowd? Is there not enough crowd? Like, do that entire analysis in your head before going ahead with it. So this is first. Go look for a place where you know you can park. Second is, of course, start thinking of the concept. What kind of people am I serving? What kind of food do I want to serve, right? What is unique about my food truck? Like, what am I bringing to the table as opposed to any other food truck out there? Do all of that and decide your menu because based on your menu and based on your concept and vibe, then you will be able to design the food truck. And I'm not only talking about the exterior, but also the cooking equipments that will be installed in the truck. So second, designing everything. And third is then reaching out to various food truck manufacturers so that they can manufacture a food truck. Now, there are a couple of ways you can go about it. One, you get it manufactured from scratch the way you want to get it made. Second is you buy a second-hand vehicle and then you get it customized based on what you want. So those are two ways that you can go about it. Of course, go to multiple manufacturers, get price quotes, see what they've done before. Most importantly, talk to people that they've made trucks for before so that you know what kind of quality you will get, right? So that is another thing. Then of course, place your order, get everything started, start working through the legalities of it, get your FSSAI license, get any MC approvals that you need. Then of course, your truck will be made, then you'll have to go through the RTO legalities, you'll have to get the insurance, so it'll take a very long while to just get that sorted. Then you'll have to get all your basic kitchen equipments, get the designing on the truck done. So yeah, those are a couple of things that you need to do while you're setting up your food truck.
What is the procedure about those? Are they accessible online or do you need to do some other consultants or things? Do you have to approach them in order to get it?
So for FSSAI, you can get it online as well, and you can hire a consultant. Both things can be done. Then for, of course, like your RTO thing and your insurance thing, it's a little mixed. You can, of course, if you get a consultant, things would be a lot easier. They'll handle everything on your side, but it's not impossible to get a new registration by yourself as well. And then insurance also, you can get it by yourself, or you can just hire a consultant. So yeah.
One more thing I want to add to that conversation is that how it is so crucial to make sure that you trademark your name and also buy a domain from the very beginning. I think most of the businesses sometimes, especially early on, fail to do it. And I think eventually when they want to scale it, when they want to expand it, that's when they realize, oh, they don't even own the name their business have been running under. And rebranding a business which has already been running for a while is a lot of paperwork and headache. And the legalities are a lot complex. So I think it is very crucial that you make sure you trademark your name from the beginning and also make sure you get your domain for it, even if it's a food truck business which might not need a website. But eventually you don't know. What if it's turned into a restaurant chain? Then you probably would need it. So yeah, that's another thing I wanted to add. But moving on, let's talk about money. So what was the initial capital investment into getting this food truck up and running like?
So I think when we started out, I think the number that we thought we'll have to invest was around 3 lakh rupees, which was 2 lakhs for the food truck manufactured, and then 1 lakh on top of it in terms of, getting all the legalities done, getting the designing done, getting the equipment, things like that. But then I think what we arrived at later was around 4.5 to 5 lakhs. You have to get the truck done. You have to get the equipments that you'll put inside versus the other basic kitchen equipments that you need. And the thing is that the industrial equipments are a little more expensive. So that is another thing. Then of course, legal certifications, licenses, you have to give money there. Then what you'll also realize is that you're running around a lot to set up your business. So you'll have to invest there. Then if you're getting packaging made, and especially if you're getting custom packaging made, that cost also you have to incorporate. Because I remember we got custom packaging made, and then the MOQ only started from 500. Per packaging. So that took a lot of money from us. And then getting it designed, if you're getting it hand painted, or even if you're getting like a sport thing done, even that is expensive. Then if you want to put up lights inside, that takes money. So there are like a lot of small expenses that sort of come into play when you're actually, in the process of setting it up, that you sometimes cannot think of prior to setting it up. But yeah, I think a ballpark figure that you should take in mind is 5 lakh rupees. Will take that much to set it up.
I think in this 5 lakh, we're talking about a vehicle that is being made from scratch. I think a second-hand one and refurbishing it might be within 5 or a little more than that, I believe.
No, you get second-hand vehicles cheap only.
Cheaper than this. Lovely. Okay, that is...
Like, it doesn't take 5 lakhs just for the second-hand truck and getting it refurbished. For that, it should not take more than 1.5, 2 lakhs.
2 lakhs, perfect.
If you want like a new vehicle and then you have to get it refurbished,
then that might...
Then it is at least 6.5 lakhs. But not if you take a second-hand one and get it refurbished.
Talking a little bit about the food, because we have been talking about the food truck all this while. What about the food? So initially, how did you guys go about your menu curation? What was the process behind it? And what was the menu that you guys decided on?
So I think initially when we started, we just wanted to do food that will be like quick to grab and that everybody would just like to have. And around that time, we found this chain called Nine, which is in Kuwait. And they were doing these cute mini sandwiches.
Yeah.
And we wanted to replicate that idea. So I remember we hired a professional chef to curate the menu for us. Different kinds of mocktails and then different kinds of mini sandwiches. So we did all of that. And then we had multiple rounds of trials to just sort of get feedback from people. Like we held proper official tastings so that we could get feedback about how the food tastes. And then what we realized.
And I remember we invited our friends for all of those tasting and they were brutal as a food group.
Yeah.
So yeah, go on.
And then what ended up happening was that because we were already so over the budget with our truck, like we initially thought it'll be 3 lakhs and then it went to like 5.5 lakhs. We just did not have more money to then invest in a base kitchen and then get the cooking done and then hiring another person just to do the cooking. So we were like, why don't we just start with something that we can do at our own home, which was a 2 BHK flat. So then we just started with fries and a couple of drinks. So we did like salt fries, pie fries, cheesy fries, and then 3-4 kinds of mocktails. And that's what we started with. We just kept it basic. We were like, when we make enough money off of this to then invest in a base kitchen, we'll then have the menu that we had initially decided.
Perfect. So I remember the first location the food truck was parked in was in front of an engineering college in Bangalore, which I think was a good spot to have a food truck, especially when there are hungry students studying all day inside the campus. During that process, the whole customer acquisition aspect is where we're getting to. What were the strategies you guys used in order to make sure that you were able to attract the customers to you instead of probably another 50 stalls or shops around?
I think one major thing that matters, both in terms of, I feel like for any food establishment, be that the restaurant, cafe, a food truck, even like a thela, one thing that matters is location. And when I say location, I just don't mean the area that you're in or the road that you're parked at. I mean that even a distance of, let's say, 200 meters can make a significant difference in your sales, right? So I remember when we were initially parking on Church Street, what used to happen was that if we parked it in a certain section of the street, we used to get, let's say, 50 orders in those 3-4 hours. Versus if we just put up the stall some 200 meters away from that, our sales just used to double. And that is exactly what used to happen with the food truck also near the college. That if we parked it a little away from the main gate, sales used to suddenly dip. And if it was right at the gate, sales used to soar. So I think that is one very important thing that matters in terms of customer acquisition. That something as small as that can also make a difference. Second was running offers. I remember we just casually put up a sign saying everything at 89, and most of our products were below 89, but we still said everything at 89. And any day that we put that up, the sales used to be much higher than when we did not put it up, even though most of the things were anyways below 89. But like things like that matter. People say that, oh, everybody knows these days, but it actually matters. So that was second thing. Then the third thing was definitely visibility. Especially when you're putting up a stall or when you're putting up a food truck, lights matter, right? So if your, let's say, food truck is a little more vibrant, neon signs, there's a lot of lighting, it'll automatically grab people's attention or attract their attention, and that would basically lead to more sales.
Got it.
So that was another thing. I think that was pretty much it. Do you remember anything else that we did?
I think mostly it was that, and I think we also made sure that our customers were engaged. Like we were able to ensure recurring customers. That was only because I think while the food was being prepared, we had people to keep them engaged, tell them the story about the food truck. They were curious because I think the fact that they saw two girls of probably their age doing this piqued interest, and I think we fully capitalized on that early on, which I think was a good strategy to go about. Other than that, I think social media and word of mouth is mostly what has helped us in garnering that kind of attention. So that is for sure.
Yeah, I think about that from the beginning. We had an understanding that I was good at operational things and she was just good at like marketing, engaging with people, all of that. So I think every time we were at the food truck, I used to be inside with our employee trying to do the cooking, and she used to be like the front face, talking to people, making sure they're engaged. And she has a way with people and she has a way with words. So people used to be like hooked to her. So I think that way it went really well between us. Like we automatically, instinctively knew what our roles were.
That is true. That actually makes me think about the whole idea of friends getting into business together, which is exactly what we did, right? There's a saying that you should never do business with your family members or friends. It's just apparently not healthy. But there's a whole concept about that. But what are your take on it? Like, how do you go about finding a perfect co-founder? Because it is equally hard as finding a good partner for you.
I feel like having been partner with a friend, business partners, I feel like I would say that I don't quite agree with that saying that you shouldn't be partners with family members or friends. Because I feel like the thing is when you're setting up a business especially, there are a ton of business decisions that you have to make on an everyday basis. Every day you'll have questions, and of course if there are multiple people involved, everybody would have differing opinions, right? So there is no way that you cannot escape a good argument or a fight. It is bound to happen. So even if you, let's say, take a stranger as a co-founder, it's not that you guys won't fight. You still fight, right? The only thing is, what you should consider before being partners with a friend is your friendship good enough to sustain whatever will happen through the course of the business. In our case, even though we used to have arguments or we used to fight about things, I feel like we did not let it impact our friendship in the long run. Of course, during that time, it gets a little difficult and you don't really want to talk to the other person and things like that. That is bound to happen, let me tell you. But I think if you know that you've been friends long enough or you know each other well, then you know that no matter what happens, you'll still be friends at the end of the day. And I think one more blunder that we made because we were trying to cut cost and not spend a lot of money on rent and things, we started living together, and that made things more difficult for us between. But then we got over it. I think we just found different strategies and ways to go about things. I think more than anything, what really mattered was speaking to each other and sort of clearing things out along the way. But in general, finding a good co-founder, I think one thing you should really look at is your working partner, right? With us, for example, I'm proper type A. If I know that there's something that we need to achieve or we need to get done, I'd be like, do it, we need to do it. I'll sit and create like a proper to-do list, and then I'll expect the other person to give it their all. So let's say if we're working for 6 hours, I need that person to be there properly for 6 hours and do the work. For her, she's more of a type B person. She'll get it done, but she'll get it done her way and she'll be a little more laid back, a little more chill. And I feel like that was one thing that we didn't consider before we got into the partnership together. And that used to be the topic of most of our fights. One was that. And I think then another thing that you should look at when you're getting into a partnership with someone, you should clear out a couple of things. One, why are they doing it? Are they truly passionate about it or not, right? Are they doing it for the right reasons? Are they not doing it for the right reasons? And keep checking in with them as to how they're feeling about the business. That is one thing that you should look at. Second, what is their view on money and expenses? Are they someone, who wouldn't mind spending a little money to really take things up to the next level, or spend right off the bat to, let's say, get a couple of things? Or are they somebody who would be like, okay, I'm not going to spend money and later we'll see if we need to make improvements, if we need to turn things around. That is another topic where most people fight, like their philosophy about money and how. And I think a couple of other things. I feel like there is nothing that I can tell you that will summarize everything, because based on the relationship you have with the other person and the kind of personalities that you are, your fights will differ, your arguments will differ. So I think what you need to just look at is if you are vibing with the other person. And people might say that for a business you don't really need to vibe with them, but the amount of hours that you're spending with them, you have to vibe with them.
Agreed.
And one more thing is, see how the other person is fighting. When they are fighting, are they ready to talk things over, fix them right there and then, or are they somebody who won't compromise after a fight, or they'll mull over after a fight? Things like that also matter, because you need somebody who will sit with you, who will tell you what their problem is, who will try to come to a solution and get over things, because you don't have entire day to spend on a fight when you're running a business. And I can go on and on. It's almost like a romantic relationship. Anything that you look at in a partner, you should look at for a business partner as well, because you're going to be spending a lot of time.
So that conversation kind of reminds me of various incidents that have happened with us along this course and journey of building or getting the food truck up and running. And one of the main lessons about this whole experience has definitely been the fact that how you need to verify mentors and people you get into business with. And I think that was definitely a eye-opener for us when that happened, which is what we're kind of going to get into. And I feel like this is definitely going to be a awakening call for a lot of people who listen as well, who might be a little naive in the beginning like us. So why don't we get into that while I have already ruined or build up the suspense instead?
I feel like you were as much of a part of the entire business as I was. Let me do the interviewing for a bit.
Okay, are we switching here? Fine, let's do this. So, I think that is true. I have been there, witnessed the whole thing as well. So, I mean, essentially, to talk about the incident per se, I would say that I did not realize that how transportation carrier services in India was the biggest scam that no one discovered until I think we personally did. Well, the thing happened to be such that the transportation services that was supposed to take the food truck from Rajasthan, where it was manufactured, to Bangalore, where it was being commissioned to, I think, most of the journey, what happened would, in plain words, be described as fraud. Uh, where I think the vehicle also got stolen in between. The batteries in the vehicles were stolen. The money that was given to the transportation services in order to deliver the vehicle safely, I think that was also had to be written off. So I feel like one definitely biggest lesson from that is that when you work on the grassroots with people, with various vendors, you have to make sure that you somehow verify the genuinity of their services. And although it is true that we did our due diligence by making sure they had a website, they looked legitimate on paper, despite having a GST number, I think sometimes you need to take that extra precaution to make sure that things like this don't happen. And although some of it is still not in our control, but yeah, that is definitely funny now that I think about it in retrospect, but not when it was happening.
It was the
So,
most daunting thing while it was happening. It just felt like it's the end of everything. Like months of planning, all of our savings had just gone into that vehicle, and then one day we realized that it's gone. And but somehow we were able to find that person again, blackmail him a little, give him police threats, and at least get the truck back. And we somehow got it transported to Bangalore.
I think the whole fiasco just costed us 2 months. That was a setback,
True.
easily. That was interesting to listen to, Mehak. But I had another question for you. If you were to do all of this all over again, what do you think you will do differently this time?
I think from the top of my mind, a couple of really important things that I would do differently would be that first, I think when we started the entire venture, our main focus was on getting the cart manufactured and not so much on finding a spot and then really fixating on where we should actually be conducting our business. And I think a lot of our decisions should have been around that central focal point, which we missed doing. So I think one thing would be that. Second thing would be I would do a much more deeper investigation into who I'm getting into business with. I feel like back then we didn't really do enough background check. We didn't do enough like web checks in general. I think I would do that differently. Actually, those are the only two major things because I feel like a lot of things were actually around these two central points. So yes,
Yeah.
those two things.
Agreed. I think another thing to add from my end would probably be that we have the strings of our purse pulled a little more tighter, because I feel like because it was all new, we weren't really able to prioritize what is more important and what's not. And hence I feel like there were few leakages initially, but I feel like that's also something you learn at the job. So yeah, that's for sure.
Plus, it
But
also seemed like leakages because our initial estimates were so off. If our initial estimates hadn't been off,
yeah.
technically 95% of the expenses had to happen or had to be incurred. Only 5% of them were actually, maybe we could have skipped through them, but there was no way of knowing. So I
So
feel
that
like, yeah, a person who's starting a business, while they should be very aware of the fact that they shouldn't spend a lot, they should also not compromise on getting the right things for their business by, I don't know, holding back a lot. I don't think that's the right approach because you only launch the business once.
Agreed. And I think that kind of re-emphasize on the fact that more research need to go in with regard to the market and how you're gonna go about it, the finances, all of that aspects. Interesting. I actually have another question for you. How was the whole process of hiring a person? Like, because if you're starting something new, the first initial team you put together is very crucial for the backbone of your startup. It almost decides how it thrives. So, how did you go about that process?
So ours was a little complicated. I think in general it is very hard to find good people for your team, or to find like uh, people in general. But then I think it was much more complex for us because we needed three people in one. So we needed somebody who could cook, then we needed somebody who could drive the food truck, and then we also needed somebody who is a local, because neither of us were locals and neither of us knew the local language. Because of which it was so much more harder to actually find that one person. I remember that I think you put up stuff on LinkedIn and various like employee websites, and none of that worked. What finally and eventually worked was we actually went shop from shop, and we covered multiple areas in Bangalore just to find the one person. We used to just go to shop, be like, "Do you have a person? We have a vacancy." And then finally one day from Vega City Mall, we got another person. We stole a person. We poached the person. Correct. And that's how we found him.
But I can recall the incident, and I would definitely say it's probably one of the most dramatic things that we have done. The fact that you had to write down the number and the potential salary in a slip and slide it down across the counter, hoping the manager wouldn't catch us trying to poach their employees. But not sure the ethical aspect of it, but I feel like the person who later on joined with us was definitely happy at the job. So. So I have another question for you, which is, let's say if you were to think of giving a couple of advice to people who are to start a food truck, what would that be?
About starting a food truck, I'd say that, whenever anybody is opening a food truck, it seems like a very exciting thing to do. Like, it's low key like glamorous, you've seen Chef movie and everything. It just seems like such an exciting thing to do. Every day you're at the food truck, cooking stuff, you meet new people. It just seems very exciting as a concept in itself. But I think what a lot of people don't see is the amount of work that goes in the background. So, as many hours as you put up running the food truck at the forefront, there's equal amounts of time that goes in managing the operations in the back kitchen. So, if let's say you have to put up your truck at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m., depending on what you're selling, and if it is even remotely cooking intensive, then you need at least 3 to 4 hours in your back kitchen just preparing that stuff. When I used to run the food truck here in Chandigarh, we were putting it up in 2 batches. So, one was like a morning/afternoon spot, and then one was an evening spot. So for the afternoon or morning spot, we had to like wake up at 6:30, 7 a.m. to start preparing the food. Then it used to take us 3-4 hours to prepare the food. Then we used to go to the spot, put up the truck, run it for let's say another 4-5 hours. Then spend 1 hour in just wrapping it up, taking it to the new spot, then putting it up again, then running it for 4-5 hours, then again closing it up. And that entire day used to be at least in 13-14 hours. And of course you can compartmentalize it in a way that you have different people. But what you have to keep in consideration is that, especially when you're starting out, right, you have to be heavily involved in each of the operations. So be it, the back kitchen stuff, be it being at the truck, you have to be there all the time. Because early on, you don't want to heavily rely on people that you don't trust. Which is why I think it's like you need to be very physically involved, and it's physically very, very tiring. So if you're not somebody who has a lot of stamina who's used to a lot of physical work, then getting into the food industry in itself is something that you should think twice about. So I think that is one misconception that I like to break. Start with something innovative. Do a product that nobody has heard of, or that is very new. And while you can do that, something that you should be wary of, that people are not always very open to trying new things. Like, yes, there'll be like 10-15% of the population who would want to try it, and it might initially get you the kind of traction that you want. Again, might. Majority of your population doesn't always want to try something new. So I think the key balance is to have 1 or 2 items that will make you stand out in, let's say, a big crowd. But good 70-80% of your menu should be things that anybody would like to have, that somebody wouldn't have to think twice before purchasing. To have a safe menu with 1 or 2 items that will make you famous, or that will get you the traction that you want. That is another misconception. And I think third thing would be that a lot of times people say that, if you put up the truck for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, that the number of customers you'll have will like sort of multiply. Again, something that is not necessarily true. That while, yes, the more number of people that'll get to know about your truck. They'll keep coming in, that'll keep multiplying. But it's a very, very slow and gradual process. Month, 1 year, like duration. I remember when we first wanted to start a food truck, we went to this coffee food truck that was putting up their truck in Indiranagar. And I remember they'd already been in business for a good 6-7 months, and still they weren't getting more than, let's say, 15-20 orders a day. And now when I see their Instagram, I see that now they're getting traction. So it takes a very long time to build that kind of consumer base, and even after 1 year, it's not like they have a lot of people coming in. So yeah, that's another thing.
A day in a food truck owner's life look like?
So a day would be you waking up early in the morning, going to the back kitchen, either cooking yourself, which is what we did because we didn't have enough money to hire people. We had like one employee, so cooking with them. Then making sure that you have the stock for at least the next 3 days, so doing your inventory. Then going to the truck, carrying everything to the spot, putting it up, then running it for, let's say, another 7-8 hours, then wrapping it up again, getting everything back to your base kitchen, cleaning everything up, cleaning the truck, throwing off everything that needs to be thrown off, otherwise storing everything else in the fridge, and then just cleaning the entire space. Your day wouldn't ideally end until 10-11 p.m. at night, assuming that you're running the truck from, let's say, 11 a.m. to then 9:30 p.m. So I was running the food truck for 6-7 months, initially with Shahana and then alone. And then it was going pretty decently. Like, I was making money. But then what I realized, and the reason I pivoted, first of all, I pivoted to like a full-time catering business. The reason I pivoted was, one, when I was putting up the food truck, I started getting a couple of catering orders because people tasted my food, they liked it, and they were like, "We want South Indian catering, why don't you come and do it for us?" And at that time, it just seemed like, yeah, why not? And then once I started doing it, I realized that it was, a lot less of a physical effort because it was only, let's say, at that time I was only getting like one catering order once a week. 2-3 days I have to make the effort and then I'm free. I was making a lot more money in catering than I was doing in the food truck business. And then there wasn't any reliance on labor per se because my chefs, my waiters, all the people that I wanted, I was getting them on contract basis. So which is why I decided that it was a good switch. So one was that. Second, a very, very big problem with running a food truck is that while I had those 2 spots secured, when I thought of actually making it from like 1 food truck to 2 to 3 to 4, one big challenge that I saw was that it was very hard to park it in any public space because there is no clear legal framework around it. Like, municipality won't give you an outright license to do it, with the other vendors around you. By vendors, I mean either shop vendors or even hawkers who've been at your spot for a very long time. It just seemed like that it wouldn't be very easy to expand it as a business model in itself. Third, like I said, there was a very heavy reliance on people, and it is very hard to retain people. And what I figured was that, the person I had either wanted to take leaves or 1 or 2 people actually quit, and then it took me a very long time to actually train them again and things like that. And that wasn't the case in the catering business. So I think it was less of whether the food truck business was going well or not. There was another business model that I thought made more sense, which is why I pivoted. And I didn't hesitate to pivot because I'd already been taking like catering orders for a month or 2. I saw the potential in it, and it just seemed like that it would match my skill set more because I was less into cooking and more into managing things and the operational side of things. That is why don't ever think twice before pivoting or making changes, because people might say that, oh, you've just started this, at least give it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. But if you have a solid reason as to why you're pivoting, then do it. I'm incredibly happy that I made that shift from running a food truck full time to doing like this catering thing. Because right now, like, I work, let's say 5-6 times less than I was, and I still make the same amount of money, and I've just started, right? So there's a lot of potential. I'm trying to grow it day by day. So I think, don't let that thing hold you back, that because you've chosen one business model, because you've chosen this business. You have to stick to it for the next 3 years before you decide to quit or before you decide to pivot. Like, don't be in that mindset. And let me tell you, there'll be a lot of people telling you that stick to what you've chosen, but don't necessarily fall for it. Starting a business is very easy, but sustaining one is incredibly hard. Business start करना बहुत आसान है, लेकिन उसको sustain करना